By March, 3 months after he started appearing in the background of my AI-generated images, Clemens had developed a fully realized corporeal form. His pixels became skin and sinew. His ink turned to hot blood. Although he'd given up on escaping the small windowless room at the center of my apartment, a space that used to be my home office, he had not died. His motherless flesh appeared distinctly human, but he'd gone weeks without a sip of water. His faux heart seemed to beat, but he hadn't caked the room in shit and piss during his months-long incarceration. I never noticed a fetid odor creeping out from underneath the barricaded doorway, at least, although Clemens shares our form. He's free from our demanding physiology. That doesn't mean he lacks our sense of hunger, quite the contrary, he yearns for something with a feverish intensity. Judging by the way his voice cracked when he pleaded, an activity he did indefinitely since he was born, the hunger must be agonizing. I empathized with the poor Anomaly. Truly, I did. In a certain light, I suppose I was responsible for him as well. But no matter how loudly he shrieked, I wouldn't be the martyr to his hunger. I want to crawl inside of you, he begged, slamming his fists against the wall shared between my office and bedroom. Clemens required a permanent solution. He wouldn't starve, I couldn't kill him. And the neighbors were beginning to ask questions. After an exhaustive review of the projects I had sold in the last year, I pinpointed when he first infiltrated my work, December 10, 2024. A picture labeled Girl, Commission .1224 on my hard drive. In the foreground, leaning on the edge of a picnic table, there's a young woman, slim, bright blue eyes, colorful tattoos running down her left arm, sporting a confident grin to match her revealing tank top. Can't recall if the goal was to sell the high-end looking rollerblades on her feet or the cola she's holding up to her mouth, nor can I recall which pieces of the picture were real and which were AI generated. Now that I'm really thinking about it, maybe the image was an ad for a fledgling tattoo shop. It's unclear, and I have a bad habit of labeling image files something unhelpfully vague, like picture 844 or untitled. A shiver galloped over my shoulders when I spotted him. Clemens. An unassuming stick figure looming alone on the desert's horizon, he was barely perceptible. Before anyone asks, I don't remember why there's a picnic table in the desert. I'm aware it's out of place. Maybe it's an error, maybe it's not. Pretty sure you can't rollerblade across sand either. It isn't my job to make it make sense. I create what's requested. If the client is happy, they send over some cash. If they aren't happy or they don't pay me, no big deal. No hard feelings and no time wasted. I didn't spend days on end hunched over a desk in a dark room like a medieval monk copying the Bible by hand, only to be denied compensation, the grief of being an artist for hire. Been there, done that, never again. Let me put it this way, I willingly missed my father's funeral. I unabashedly slept with my best friend's wife. I've made some grave mistakes. Still, if I was given the opportunity to change the past, if I was gifted the power to reverse one mistake in my life, I'd choose a career at Taco Bell as opposed to drawing for commission. Ain't no truer heartbreak than forcing something you love to turn a profit. Business is a violent corruption, it infects even the holiest of pursuits, swims through its veins like the flu, making it sickly and diseased and weak. Once you realize what you've done, the harm you've caused, it's far too late, the corruption is inseparable. The thing that gave your life purpose has become irreparably defiled. It's not the same, not like it was before, and it'll never be the same. For those non-artists out there, I can help you relate. Imagine pimping out your spouse to make ends meet. The pain, I'd theorize, is pretty close. Anyway, I generated that image, Girl, Commission .1224, around Christmas. Clemens was present then, and he's remained present ever since then. In the next project, he was in the same place, deep in the background, a little right of center, but he was slightly bigger. Same with the next picture, identical location and a tiny bit larger. A dozen images later, he'd tripled in size. So on, and so on, and so on. The system didn't always generate his human form. I think I would have noticed that quicker. In one photo, his contours were constructed from lines of foam on the ocean. In another, I saw his screaming mouth framed by strings of pasta. No matter the contents of the image, once Clemens appeared, never left. He doesn't have the most memorable face, no, his visage is decidedly average, short brown hair with narrow eyes and a hooked nose. The only notable feature was his mouth, perpetually fixed open in the shape of a scream, but, on a cursory inspection, that didn't even strike me as alarming. I breezed over his wailing expression hundreds of times without noticing. It just didn't stand out. Initially, my brain didn't flag the profound distress as abnormal. However, once I stared for long enough, once I really matched his gaze, the truth became apparent. I shot up from my kitchen table and sent the chair clattering to the floor behind me, shrieking like a goddamned banshee. Simply put, he's empty. Truly and utterly empty. Even the dead aren't empty, not like Clemens. He's a creature abandoned, not only by God, but by the devil as well. The virtuous and the damned may seem completely antithetical to each other, but they both at least have substance. Not him, he's absence made flesh, and he was born within the confines of my home office. That night, a familiar noise jolted me awake. I sprang upright in bed, wading through the thick stupor of aborted sleep to orient myself to the pitch-black room. The rhythmic chugging of machinery curled into my ears. What the hell is the printer doing on at 3 in the morning? I sighed and swung my legs over the side of the bed. Finally time to send the old boy out to pasture, I grumbled, getting to my feet. The mercy killing was long overdue. My printer was older than sin, and it looked the part. A large, unwieldy block of yellow-gray plastic that shook the desk from the clunky force of its work. Not only was the technology embarrassingly cumbersome, but it was also glitchy as all hell. A single particle of dust, if conniving enough, could very easily drift through the cracks in its chassis and wedge itself between two of its geriatric gears. Stalling their weary motion and creating a system-wide shutdown, enough was enough, though. I rounded the corner, creaking open the door to my home office, intent on turning it off for good. I had the money to replace the damn thing, just never got around to it. This, however, was the last straw. When I flicked on the light, my footsteps slowed to a stop. A slight twinge of fear wormed its way up my throat. For all its flaws, the singular upside to my printer was its generous capacity. It could hold more than 1,000 sheets at a time, and that quality was on full display. Apparently, the device had been active for a while before its chaotic sputtering woke me up. A vast puddle of printed images laid at its feet. Some were upright, some were face down, but they all seemed to depict the same thing. I crept closer. The machine continued to quake and thunder. I reached out a tremulous hand and pulled the freshest sheet from the tray before it slid forward into the pile of ink and paper below. My eyes squinted as I scanned the picture from corner to corner. Flipped it upside down, trying to better grasp what I was looking at. No matter how contorted the image, though, an epiphany eluded me. It was just a face, a man with brown hair, narrow eyes, and a hooked nose, so claustrophobically close to the picture's point of reference that his features had become out of focus and blurry. Suddenly, my fingers let go. Fear didn't cause me to drop the picture. I hadn't stared long enough to appreciate his emptiness. Not yet. No, it was dizziness. In the blink of an eye, the image developed an impossible depth. It became more like I was peering at a reflection in a mirror rather than a two-dimensional image. And the shift in perception made me feel intensely off balance and devastatingly nauseous. As it fluttered to the floor, my gaze drifted to some of the other upright images in the pile. I recognized some of them, or rather, their shared foundation. They were made for my most recent commission project, which involved inserting an AI-made studio audience behind an actual photo of an up-and-coming comedian, bleachers cramped with procedurally generated humans, smiling and laughing and cheering on the budding celebrity. The picture landed gently aside the pile. A soft, wet crinkling caught my ear. The process was subtle at first. I attempted to soothe my reeling psyche. Surely, I was hallucinating. Or dreaming. or suffering from some sort of brain infection. As if to refute my laundry list of flimsy rationalizations, the crinkling intensified. He was gaining momentum. His face began emerging from the picture I dropped. The tip of his nose and portions of his cheeks would materialize for a few seconds, only to fall back within the confines of the image, like he was fighting to buoy himself above the waters of a tempestuous ocean. A thin but sturdy membrane encased his skin. When exposed to the dryness of the air, that ethereal packaging seemed to shrivel and desiccate. The resulting noise was like crinkling plastic wrap. A complete face surfaced for a moment and then submerged, which was followed seconds later by a face and a neck, and finally by a face, neck, shoulder, and arm. Once he had an arm out and anchored to the floor, he no longer sunk below the surface. He set 2 elbows on the floor, put his hands to his face, and ripped into the dehydrated amnion encasing his body. As the membrane tore, a guttural, waterlogged scream erupted from his infant lungs. He didn't need to breathe, so it didn't need to stop. The howl spun around his vocal cords indefinitely, never losing its shape or shedding its pain. I sprinted out of the room. I remember pushing the wardrobe in front of the closed office door. I recall pacing aimlessly around my apartment, scratching at my face in a moment of temporary insanity, convinced I was covered in my own ethereal packaging. I'd just been unaware of it my entire life. Eventually, I calmed down enough to blare a semi-coherent question at the trapped entity. What the hell do you want? His wailing did not abate, but that did not interfere with his ability to answer the question. A deep, craggy voice layered itself over the mournful drone. I want to crawl inside of you. Eventually, EMS arrived. I don't remember calling them, but there's a lot I don't remember about that night. I let them in and moved the barricade, but I refused to follow them into the office, which had since become impenetrably dark. Seconds later, they started screaming too, but their agony only lasted for a moment, and then it was gone. They were gone. Without saying a word, I quickly pushed the wardrobe back in front of the door and collapsed onto the hallway floor. No one else ever called 911. Despite living on the 6th floor of a cramped apartment complex, neighbors above, below, and flanking my home on both sides, no police ever came knocking, pistols drawn with the assumption that murder was taking place behind my apartment's front door. Given the ceaseless screaming, it's as if nobody could hear him but me, but that turned out to be incorrect. The truth of the matter was much stranger. I trudged through those first few sleepless days as nothing more than a pathetic ball of anxiety, just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Surely, he'll escape. He'll flatten himself to the thickness of a pancake and slide under the barrier. Or he'll just phase through the wall and appear on the other side. Nope. He never left. Fortunately, he took breaks from screaming. They were small breaks, though, an hour here, an hour there. I wanted to get away from the screaming for more than 60 minutes at a time, but that meant I'd have to leave him alone in my apartment. What if he broke free? What if someone finally reported his caterwauling to the authorities? Wouldn't it be worse, legally speaking, if I wasn't there to explain the situation? A week passed, and nothing changed. I didn't find that reassuring, but I began to acclimate. There was a certain combination of exhaustion, whiskey, and apathy that, when blended in exactly the right ratio, allowed me more than 5 minutes of sleep at a time. I started noticing that the man across the hall would spy on me through a slight crack in his door every time I left the apartment. He didn't look angry. The grizzled, middle-aged Italian wore a big, toothy grin as he monitored me, an expression I'd never seen him make before then. Some time later, he knocked on my door. The clock on my stove read 1:15 midnight. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen before I answered, hiding it behind my back as I creaked it open and stuck my head out. My neighbor, clad in a dirty white t-shirt and boxer briefs, just stood there. I grimaced at the sight of his bare feet firmly planted on my welcome mat, and the rows of cigarette-stained teeth peeking through his wide smile. He said nothing, so the only noise in that moment was the scream radiating out from my apartment. Can I help you? I muttered, the knife's wooden handle becoming slick with sweat. His smile broadened. Yes. The singing. Very, very beautiful. Bellissimo. May I come in? My jaw hit the floor. I slammed the door in his face. but he wasn't upset at me. Yes, well thank you, his voice is angel. The muffled reply twisted my stomach into knots. I said nothing back, and I think he left. The following day, a kid I didn't recognize was sitting beside my door when I was about to leave, desperate to restock my liquor cabinet. He jumped to his feet, wild eyes looking me up and down. I think he considered darting between my legs to get inside, but ultimately decided against it. Hello sir, is Clemens home? Would it be okay if I came in and listened to him sing? I bent over, suppressing the urge to shoo him away like a fly buzzing around my head. Hey, where are your parents, bud? He giggled, and before I could repeat the question, sprinted away. From that point on, they all referred to him as Clemens. Calls from unknown numbers are inquiring about Clemens. Lines of people waiting in the hallway for Clemens. Notes slipped under my door and letters stuffed into my P.O. box addressed to Clemens. There was a perverse equilibrium to their persistence. They were dying to hear him sing. I would have killed to silence his scream. One day, I opened the wardrobe, pushed the still hanging clothes aside, and drilled a quarter-sized hole through the wood. When I released the trigger and the whirring of the drill stopped, his screaming had also stopped. Pure, quiet darkness poured from the hole. Seconds ticked by with all the urgency of an inner tube floating down a lazy river. My heart slammed against the back of throat. The purple red of his palate appeared from the darkness. Clemens had his mouth against the hole. He paused. Then, he screamed, his uvula swinging like a motorized chandelier. I put the butt of my pistol up to the hole and fired. 1, 2, 3 shots. The scent of gunpowder coated my nostrils. As the ringing in my ears died down, his screaming dripped back in. As far as I could tell, Clemens was completely intact. The bullets hadn't even stunned him. I covered the hole with the back of a wooden picture frame and nailed it into place. Previously, it had held a photograph of my siblings and me at the boardwalk, but patching the entity's cage seemed like a higher, more important calling in comparison. I released my grip on the hammer and let it clatter to the floor, though I barely heard it above the screaming. My legs felt like stone, aching from how long I'd stood motionless in front of the barricade. Despite the discomfort, my gaze remained fixed on the picture frame. I traced the wood's natural markings from left to right like a line of scripture written in a foreign language, over and over again, surveying its symbols with no grasp of their meaning. The more I studied it, the more I noticed its subtle movement, slightly concave, then slightly convex. Bowed in, then pushed out. Contracted, then expanded, inhale, exhale. I dashed into my bedroom, pins and needles buzzing across the soles of my feet. I studied each wall. Only one was moving, the wall separating my office and my bedroom. His cage was breathing, huddled in the corner of my bedroom, half drunk, head spinning, caked in grease from days of not showering. I started typing up a Reddit post. Not this one, mind you. What I posted that day was simply a title, screaming, singing. I want to crawl inside of you. Breathing walls. Empty. Clemens. Left the body of the post blank. Further description felt unnecessary. The person I was fishing for, if they existed, wouldn't need it. Hours passed. Afternoon turned to dusk. Although the room went dark, I stayed put. I waited, sipping from a glass bottle while watching the wall, praying that someone would send me a message or comment on the post. The breathing was no longer subtle. During inhales, the plaster sunk in a few inches at the center. During exhales, the entire wall bulged outwards. I should just leave, I contemplated. The thought of the people waiting outside my apartment, however, put the consideration to rest. It didn't matter when I tried to sneak out, they were always there. They never attempted to break down the door. Like Clemens, they were patient. Vibrations on my thigh caused me to drop the mostly empty bottle. Someone was calling from a restricted number. Disappointed, I silenced it. But they called again. Then a third time. Then a fourth. That was unusual. Typically, they didn't make multiple calls in rapid succession. On a whim, I picked up. Before I could even get out a liquor-soaked hello, a female-sounding voice on the other end said, "Who's your handler?" Her tone was flat, and her syllables were curt, but there was an undeniable urgency in the way she spoke, too. As I was about to answer, a bout of acid reflux leapt up my throat. While I worked on choking the bile back into my stomach, she continued her interrogation. I said, "Who's your handler? Roscosmos? ISRO? CNSA?" I chuckled. Then, I experienced a full-on belly laugh. My sides throbbed. Tears welled in my eyes and spilled down my cheeks. Eventually, I suppressed my wheezing fits long enough to respond, "Lady, I make shitty pictures for cereal brands you've never heard of." Retrospectively, it was an odd and cryptic response, but she seemed to get the idea. "You're a civilian?" I nodded. When I realized she wouldn't be able to hear my nod, I responded, "Yes, ma'am." This seemed to unnerve her. She paused for a while, and I waited, struggling to suppress a giggle here and there. "Explain to me what you're seeing," she demanded. I gave her an exceptionally abbreviated version of the events I've described here. Once I got to the part where the walls started breathing, she interrupted me. "Listen closely. I need you to find one of two things, either a large mirror or a TV made before 2007. Then, move the barricade. Place the TV or the mirror in front of the door. Open the door. The grift, Clemens, will leave to find you. He's desperate to hollow you out. Most likely, he'll accidentally get stuck. He'll enter the TV or the mirror and won't be able to determine a way out. If the grift, Clemens, is adequately contained, you should be able to see his reflection in the object. When it's done, call me back at XXXXXXXX. Write the number down." By that point, I was already pulling the flat screen off of my bedroom wall, phone nestled between my shoulder and my ear. "Repeat those instructions back to me," she barked. "Old TV or big mirror, should be able to see his reflection. Call you back at XXXXXXXX. The line clicked. She hung up. Whoever that woman was, however she learned of my post and figured out how to contact me, she gave me exactly what I was hoping for. She was a miracle, no other way to put it. A true godsend, whether out of fear or just plain laziness. I couldn't justify killing myself, nor could I justify leaving the apartment, but I needed Clemens gone. Her instructions were a beautiful workaround to that standstill. Either they would work, or they wouldn't. If I didn't manage to contain him, then I'd probably die. Seemed like a win-win. I paced into the hallway, set the TV down, and began pushing the wardrobe out of the way. The volume of his screams grew louder. I stepped into my office for the first time in weeks. Other than a thick layer of soggy dust settled across every inch of the room, not much had really changed. With Clemens trapped, the walls ceased breathing. Weirdly, I sort of missed the rhythmic movements, but I suppose that's neither here nor there. I'm alive. All's well that ends well. That said, I think I may have made a small mistake. Yes, the TV was old, but it wasn't that old, certainly not older than 2007. I assumed it would still work. When Clemens sprinted out of the room, sinking into the screen as soon as he made contact, I assumed it was all okay. I even saw his reflection. The problem? I only saw his reflection for a few minutes. Then, he disappeared. Maybe that's just that I don't know. Part of the process, I thought. I attempted to call the woman back, but I couldn't remember her phone number. Still, I wasn't worried. Clemens was gone. The people camping outside my apartment had dispersed. No one ever came looking for the EMS workers that vanished, and the dust wasn't too hard to clean up. My life went back to normal. A diluted, tenuous version of normal, anyway. I suppressed the memories. Came close to convincing myself it was all some fever dream a handful of times. That was until I was flicking through the channels one afternoon and saw a man with short brown hair, narrow eyes, and a hooked nose, sitting amongst a group of reporters during a press conference. He was on the next channel, too, loading packages onto a truck in the background of some medical drama. He wasn't watching where he was going either. He was looking straight at the camera, I googled what changed about TVs in 2007, curious as to why that date was so important. Apparently, that's the year they got Bluetooth. This is not a confession, I just figured I should alert someone. Similar to before, he's getting incrementally closer. Bigger every time I check. Like I said at the top, though, I make what I'm asked to make. No more, no less, my recommendation. Keep your TVs off. Whatever happens from here, whether you choose to listen or don't, it won't be my fault.